Hello and welcome to Accelerate Your Data-Driven Decision Making, another in our public safety webinar series for fire and EMS agencies. And we'll thank you for joining us. These webinars are part of Esri's effort to promote the use of GIS by public safety agencies. And I want to go over just a couple logistical items, housekeeping here. There will be a recording of the webinar to all registered attendees. A link will be sent, and then relevant links will also be sent after the webinar. We do have a chat function that we encourage you to ask questions, so please type your questions in and we'll get to them as we can throughout the webinar at the end during a Q&A session, and those we don't get to, we'll reach out to you directly after the webinar. I am Mike Cox. I am your Director of Fire, Rescue, and EMS Solutions for Esri, and today we're joined by two rock stars of data and GIS for the fire service. We got Robert Edson from our public safety partner Intterra, and we also have David Blankenship, who previously or is currently with Intterra, but is also doing great work with Western Fire Chiefs and the Fire Data Lab. So I'll turn it over to Robert first for introduction. Robert?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Super excited to be here and talk about data-driven decision making in the fire service. My name is Robert Edson. I'm the Chief Sales and Marketing Officer for Intterra. Looking forward to having some conversations today about how data can help you in a GIS world and help you migrate forward with your department, what you're capable of doing. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. Appreciate it.
No, thanks for joining us, Robert. And David.
Happy to be here too. Thanks. I appreciate it. It's always a great morning when you can wake up and talk about data and GIS and really talk about it with a lot of perspective. So we're excited to talk today and talk about how we're seeing this work and things that are working in this realm. It used to be that we would talk about how we should do it, how we ought to do it. And it's nice to be able to report back a little bit from an industry perspective.
Thanks, David. And I want to give a little background on GIS and Esri's support of fire and EMS and public safety in general. Many of you know Esri well, and some may not. An international company that's been in business for over 50 years, 49 offices worldwide. And we do a great deal of work, local and state government domestically, and public safety and fire agencies internationally. And I'm often asked, what is the importance of GIS in the fire service, and really how does GIS impact us? And GIS is so much more than a map. It allows you to collect data and measure that data, and then we can analyze it within the applications, understand it and take action, measure the actions we take, and as importantly, we can communicate what this analysis provides internally to our firefighters and medics, or to our chain of command up to our chief officers, or even elected officials in the public. And we'll talk about some transparency examples in just a moment. But the fire service generates a great deal of data, and Robert and David will get into some excellent uses of how we can leverage that data to not only help make decisions, but justify budgetary processes or increase the safety of firefighters and medics as we respond to our incidents. And we often have large amounts of data that we're not analyzing or viewing appropriately. And most of the time that data is in some sort of database view, but we can, with the right applications in GIS, give it that geospatial perspective. And it can better provide, that insight into where our risks are and who it's impacting. And so not only what's occurring, but when is it occurring, where is it occurring, and who is it occurring to, which GIS is the platform to have that kind of analysis and those kind of insights. And we see these capabilities demonstrated again and again. Certainly with the recent response to the COVID crisis, we've seen a lot of GIS-based applications and initiatives from a local government level all the way up to federal agencies and internationally for statewide level agencies there. And you can see some good examples here, that like the Arizona dashboard and their emergency management dashboard, an excellent example. I encourage everybody to take a look at it. If you haven't seen it, email me and I can get you the link, because most of it's public. But the ability to have that data that is visualized appropriately and tells your story, and whether that's operationally to the personnel in the field or to the public, GIS allows that flexibility to bring that data together. And it doesn't matter if it's day-to-day operations or community risk reduction efforts or responses to disaster. And we see over and over again the excellent use of the application by our users in the field. And that's what we really want to promote here. And a lot of our users take advantage of the network and the partnerships in the GIS community. And that's what we're here today with Intterra and Fire Data Lab and Western Fire Chiefs to give you an example of how GIS allows you to integrate not only across agencies, across borders, but even across different partners that can help you improve your operations, build efficiencies into your operations, and provide that right data to the right person at the right time to make good decisions. And certainly one of our prominent public safety partners is Intterra, and whether you're dealing with strategic issues down to tactical level decision making, Intterra is an excellent platform that's deployed nationally, and I'm sure Robert will speak to their footprint and how they're impacting the fire service. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Robert and allow him to go through data-driven decision making. Robert, you're up.
Thanks, Mike. And you know, I think you mentioned something important. You know, the visualization and telling a story with data is something that's absolutely critical in data-driven decision making. And you know, the things we're going to talk about today, I think it's important to reiterate that things the things we're going to show you today are things that are being used today. They're not vaporware. They're not new concepts. They're things that are in practice today and being utilized out there by departments all over the country. So what is data to the fire service? You know, what types of things are actually, you know, considered to be data out there in the fire service? We've got operational data. We've got all kinds of different data sets coming in from accreditation. You've got different piece parts of information coming in from all over different areas in the fire service today. And so one of the concerns that folks have is what do we do with all of this information, right? How do we make sense of it? How do we make it work? Where does it all live and breathe? And really, what do we do with all of this stuff, right? Performance data, operational information, all kinds of data, and what are we actually going to do with that stuff? So today, one of the things it's important to understand is that working with data is you don't want to do it for the sake of doing it. It's just like buying technology for the sake of buying technology. You don't want to manage that information and do it just for the sake of doing it or to a given thought process. You want to do it for good reason, and you want to have a cause and an effect for the things you're trying to do. So the reality is that there's a thought process. So the slides are advancing really slow today. Sorry, guys. There's a thought process in the military called moving left of bang. And the idea in the risk management cycle is that bang is an event. And moving left of bang is really the mitigation and preparedness for that event, and then responding and recovering is on the other side of that. And so what we want to do using data is to try to move further left of bang and pivoting to those different data sources. And how do we go about doing that, right? How do we advance information, and how do we move left of bang when it comes to those data sources? Data-driven decision making can really be driven to every level of a department. Or organizations all the way down to the line level, to your company officers and to the chiefs. Understanding the value of that data beyond the metric, however, and the anecdotal sake of analytics, like I've said, is not outcome driven, right? With leaders' intent being clear, it's critical to cultural adoption of data that the value of the information is there. You're not doing it for the sake of doing it. And to be able to deliver data in a consumable format for a 3-minute ride. If you think about a company officer getting into a rig and trying to process all the information that's available to them today in a 3 to 5 minute ride on the way to a call to prepare their crews instead of hunting for that data, that's the way you want to try to present that information to them. And the reality is that that's not at all a different thought process to how you would want to communicate to other stakeholders like electeds. Understanding the value of that consumable format and being able to deliver that in a 3-minute ride is a critical way to to consider moving forward with data. So the reality is that it's incumbent upon us in the fire service to be data driven. I mean, look, let's face it, nobody trusts politicians anymore, at least I hope they don't. A lot of folks struggle to trust our police officers anymore for all kinds of good, bad, and indifferent reasons. But the fire service still maintains a position of sort of being the last bastion of trust in government. And that makes it incumbent upon us to pivot to data-driven decision-making. It makes it incumbent upon us to do more than just track our performance numbers. It encompasses, what my agency, my systems, my performance numbers, data validation is doing. How are my mutual aid partners and their systems doing? What are we doing with all this kind of stuff? And the most important question that's out there is, what question are you trying to answer? Again, not doing tech for the sake of tech, not doing data for the sake of data, but having a reason with leaders' intent and a reason for doing what it is that you're attempting to do. So let's talk about data and crews for company officers, situational awareness, performance, self-management. This is a screenshot from one of our customers in the Portland area. This is data for a crew and a company officer. Any crew, anytime, rolling anywhere in the Portland metropolitan area has access to the same CAD information, the same pre-planned data, the same situational awareness, no matter where they're going, from a mutual aid perspective, with data coming in from multiple dispatch centers across 20 some odd different departments in the area. This is data from all kinds of different sources, GIS information, CAD information, all being presented in a single place so that a company officer can get into a rig, do what they need to do, brief their crew so that they can dismount 3 to 5 minutes later and do what it is that they were sent there to do, and what they were sent there to accomplish. Same thing with performance metrics, driving this down to a level that you can manage at any level within the organization and gain buy-in on the value of data at a company officer level, right? Performance metrics in your face. Firefighters are one thing if they're anything, and that's competitive. One of our customers in California has gone so far as to put this data up on their turnout, the travel times, on 50-inch monitors up in the stations, so that the crews can see day to day, shift to shift, minute to minute, what's going on and how. So let's talk about data for battalion chiefs and division chiefs as we sort of move up the pike when it comes to information and data and why it's valuable. We have to give them the vision to lead and the tools to manage. So how about situational awareness? Using GIS and incident resource awareness and accountability, today we can do AVL tracking of all of our resources, aviation assets, ground assets, and shortly be able to do GPS tracking of all personnel in given areas. Being able to have that kind of situational awareness from a command and control perspective, and then be able to, as well, understand performance information quickly, simply, and easily. Look, RMS is a data storage tool, right? It's not an easy tool to use. I mean, oftentimes you've got to be able to, first of all, you got to know exactly what you're looking for. Then you got to go write a query, and if you're lucky, most of the time it'll cough up a spreadsheet. But you didn't have to go spend time figuring it out. Whereas a tool that can geospatially render performance information and put it in dashboards that make it simple to process, whether you're communicating with the public or with the electeds, makes it every bit easier for you to do things like standing in front of city council doing budget justification for apparatus or software, and your city councilman looks at you and goes, well, all right, you want a new apparatus. How many structure fires did you respond to in my district in the last 30 days? I got to go thumb through the book. Maybe I'll come back next month with data out of the RMS package. We got to go figure out what that information is, and I'll get it all to you. Instead of being able to look down at your iPad, look at the dashboard here in front of you and go, I don't know, I'm 27 and 6 of them were kitchen fires. What else would you like to know? It's a different thought process and expectation when dealing with data sets. And today, fire departments are now public health entities. Like it or not, fire departments are absolutely now public health entities. So it's incumbent upon us to be able to manage that information and data for the safety of our own crews, right? To be able to pre-plan. So what you're looking at here is a GIS-based rendering of COVID information for one of our customers that has gone in and pre-planned areas, things like nursing homes and elder care facilities and hospitals, with information about how we get patients in and out and what kind of processes are in place and what contact information is there, and can you get an elderly person that's not critically injured out to the front for us so we don't have to come inside. And situational awareness for the crews, for the battalion chiefs. Hey, here's a recent COVID positive at that area. It's SA for those agencies and for those crews, for those chiefs to be able to move ahead. Really understanding real-time data in simple format changes can change outcomes, right? When you fight access to data, when you fight looking at data in a format that makes sense, it causes issues. A swivel chair, having to switch back and forth between 5 or 6 different tools in an MDT terminal is a real problem in the fire service at almost every level. And access to data in a simplified view changes how we're able to make decisions, right? You don't ever want to allow data, tech, or tools, however, to overcome the experience of your crews, your battalion chiefs, your incident commanders at the level. And this is a quote from David, one of my good friends of mine, that says, "Don't ever stand too close to the IC," right? Which means, don't try to overwhelm and don't allow them to overwhelm their own personal expertise with the data sets that are available to them. It's got to be consumable, it's got to be understandable in the context of their own experience. But the question seems to remain, right? How do we move behind or beyond numbers to outcomes? And so let's talk about chief officers. The data bus is here. You're either on it or you're under it. There is no other option. So being able to do things like evac planning in advance for any kind of a hazard, whether it be a wildfire or flooding or whatever the case may be, being able to do evacuation planning is critical, and it's difficult to do without an effective geospatial rendering of that information and data. But it's more than just doing it for yourself, right? So the fire chief is often responsible for determining, hey, we need to evacuate this given area in, let's say, a wildland event. But it's very rarely the chief and his crews who actually have to go out and do the evacuation. It's law enforcement. So to be able to take GIS-based data, simple access to information that can easily be understood and shared, and not only send that to the Emergency Operations Center so they know what's being evacuated and can monitor status, but then to be able to take this same type of data and put it into any other system that this GIS-based, that the police officers in the field that are actually law enforcement is going to have to actually do that is critical. And it's a way to manage and effectively change the outcome of an evacuation by being able to share that data effectively using GIS. Or from a chief officer level, understanding community risk from a wildland environment perspective, or from all kinds of other community risk perspectives, structured pre-planning or different types of ways to understand what risk really is in your community in both a data and numbers way and a dashboard way, as well as a geospatial reference that helps you understand what that really means in the real world and what it means to plan for that data set. And to be able to then communicate citizen-informed risk, being able to manage and understand and help communities understand what it is that's going on and what the data is trying to teach you. What are your risks? How do you manage living in a wildland urban interface or in a floodplain or those different types of things? And what responsibilities do we share in trying to take care of you as an individual, as an organization? So there's lots of opportunities, I think, though, that data provides to an organization. These are just a few examples. Data can help support the opportunity to do third-level dispatch capabilities for working with unhoused populations or opioids or other types of non-emergent calls and events. Data can help the Fire and Emergency Management Service understand socioeconomic impacts of large-scale events, as well as day-to-day activities. And we all know that major wildfires or floods or terrorist events or the different types of things can impact, have a socioeconomic impact on any area that they happen to respond to. But so do day-to-day activities. And to be able to understand and track that is critical to understanding and being able to communicate the value that your department brings to a community. Certainly budget protection, right? Everybody's budgets, especially right now, are under attack. Whether you're being asked to make immediate cuts to your budget or plan to make cuts to the budget, or being forced on to hold on to budget, not knowing what's going to happen this fall. Data is critical to being able to manage those processes and procedures and the things you need to do, as well as developing community support and managing community support, managing things like ISO and accreditation. These are opportunities that geospatial rendering of that information and data and managing it in a simple format, making it consumable, is critical to being able to make those kind of data-driven decisions. Regional data sharing is a trend we're seeing consistently across the country. Agencies have a desire to kind of take things to the next level and being able to share data regionally. With geospatial rendering of CAD data, pre-plan information, and incident management map markups through the Intterra platform, we can now ingest multiple disparate CAD systems from a region into the same display and share that information so that any crew going anywhere, anytime knows what they're doing on a day-to-day operational basis, as well as on a large-scale application for any kind of major event. That kind of integration is critical to moving the fire service forward and being able to make data-driven decisions at every level of the organization. And again, as we've discussed already, accountability and transparency are really, really critical from a data perspective and understanding where we're going. Some common problems, though. So what are common problems in dealing with data? Internally, do our line level employees, do our line firefighters, do our captains and company officers, battalion chiefs, do they trust the data? Well, that's a really good question, and a lot of folks don't. Does your governing body trust the data? You know, trust is both the accuracy of that data and, almost more importantly, the transparency that you're able to provide with that data. And to that point, I would challenge you with one of my favorite people's questions that he asked his own department. This fire chief's got a very unique thought process in the way that he has to work. He's got instead of one municipality and 6 or 7 or 8 elected officials that he's responsible to, he's got 17 some odd different jurisdictions and 82 elected officials that he's responsible to. And at any given point in time, any one of those municipalities can pull out of his fire authority with 12 months notice. So asking harder questions about your data and not only the accuracy of that data, but the transparency of that data is critical. So I'm going to challenge those on the call today to think about going back into their organizations and asking these questions. Which is true? Is your organization trying to make your data justify its way of doing things? Or is your organization ready to learn the truth and possibly change something that is near and dear to firefighters in order to meet the need, the value that the community you serve has defined? And it's a tough question. And when you really take a step back and look at it, you know, how do we define value to the community as an example? What does the community you serve value? Have you asked? Right? Is it in fact the NFPA 1710 performance management standards and turnout and travel times and those different types of things? Is that what the community you serve values? Or is it other things? Is it something as simple as ensuring that you have a strong community presence and how many 4th of July parades are you a part of? It's a legitimate ask about you know, how you present data to the community and the value that they perceive from you and your organization. And then how do you measure and prove and manage performance to those things that the community actually values? If you haven't asked that question, again, I would challenge you to consider doing it. And one of the thought processes around that, from an effectiveness standpoint, I mean, do we manage simply performance? Are we talking about staffing or those different types of things? And really, instead of recommending by a standard, having data that supports decisions for your department and for your community based on what cost and relative change to performance in relation to how you serve those things that the community values. The approach allows you to be a trusted advisor to the ones that are tasked with making decisions, like your elected officials. And again, it's about being both accurate and transparent, making data-driven recommendations, and then putting those decisions in your stakeholders' hands is critical to the success of those long-term relationships and the things that you can and should be doing from a data perspective. So what's the future of fire data? What does it look like? The idea of being able to do different things with different areas of the fire service and combining this information and data in different sets and different areas is critical. But accuracy and transparency in working with data and simplifying how that data is processed and presented is critical. Whether you're dealing with your internal organization and trying to become and press being more data driven all the way down to a company officer level in your organization, it's critical they understand the value of that data and that it's presented in a way that's consumable that they can understand. Same thing with a battalion chief or division chief, and being able to understand why it is that these particular pieces of data are important and how to communicate them effectively, both internally and externally. Externally to your city council, to your other stakeholders, to your community at large, and the value that that community believes that you bring. And what are those things? I challenge the folks on this call to really go back and evaluate whether you're asking those questions about data and asking those questions to justify what you're currently doing or justifying doing what it is that your community actually values that you do. And are you willing to make some difficult decisions and take some things away that might be, or add some things that might be very, very close to a firefighter's heart when you're talking about some of this kind of stuff. So the future of fire data is really to be able to look at this kind of stuff. And I think as well, something to consider is again, tech for the sake of tech is a bad idea. Data for the sake of data is just as bad of an idea. And there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. There's all kinds of information, data, products, tools, and partnerships out there that will allow you to leverage what you've got today without having to literally reinvent the wheel. So being innovative doesn't always necessarily mean you are going out and being the bleeding edge. It's oftentimes relying on vendors and teams and people that you trust. So with that, I will turn it over to David to take control and talk a little bit about the Fire Data Lab and some of the ways that we've been able to work together to present that information and data from a comparison standpoint.
Thanks, Robert. I have a lot of talking to do about some of the things that you just said. It triggered so many thoughts for me as we get to spend a little more time this morning. Greetings from Colorado, the beautiful, great state of Colorado, where it's 74 degrees and we're thinking about data and fly fishing. So I hope your morning is going just as well. I am here on behalf of the Western Fire Chiefs as the Senior Technology Advisor for the Western Fire Chiefs. My name is David Blankenship. I've been around fire for a little while, and I have thoughts. So we'll talk this morning about the Fire Data Lab in particular. The Fire Data Lab is really a combination of efforts from Intterra with Robert's team, and which represents some of the best technical minds and operational firefighting data people in the world, and the Western Fire Chiefs. The Western Fire Chiefs, you might think that's a little bit of an odd choice when we're talking about data, but the WFCA over the last few years has really been in transition. They've always been very progressive. They've been entrepreneurial. They have an amazing staff that covers a lot of things, from communications with fire on a massive level. They send a thing called the Daily Dispatch out, which is just current news from everywhere, all 50 states and all the territories and holdings in the Pacific. And they're talking to the fire service, like 75,000 people a day in their inboxes that have hyper-local information from their jurisdictions. And to that end, they started thinking about, really taking a more modern approach with their entrepreneurialism to issues that matter in the fire service that are relevant. They care about specific issues like wildfire, technology, the intersection of those kind of things. They're very, very involved in economic data. In fact, one thing I would commend to you is a recent podcast that they had, a webinar maybe. You can find it on their website. What is it called? Swimming Naked, a Financial Reckoning Amidst a Pandemic, which is, you might think economic information and data sounds boring, but it is not. They bring the best speakers to bear on any of these topics, and they are diving into things that are relevant to your department. What will happen this year? What do we expect from property and sales tax revenue? What will happen over the next 3 to 5 years and even 10 years? So as an insight to planning for you, I don't want to limit your thinking here or anytime to just you know, map layers or something like that. Don't mistake us, any of us, when we're about talking about data. Information is so valuable to you, and when you can get it into a format that's distilled down that makes a difference to your line firefighting, your operations, and your strategic planning, that is real intangible value and job security, frankly, if you're a chief, to know more than anybody else. So in that same vein, within technology at the Western, we focus on creating a bunch of things, a pipeline of new technology that matches real needs in the industry, and curating a pipeline of new technology companies, technologies that are interesting, grants and venture and angel funding for those kinds of companies that are bringing real solutions. We try to plug into the big issues that are hard for individual agencies to do by themselves. There are some amazing examples. Robert showed some amazing examples, and although Mike flipped through it rather fast, there's some crazy things that departments are doing, but there are things that are happening on a macro, not a micro scale, and that's where the Western tries to focus in terms of technology. We don't want to duplicate things. We care about specifically things like large-scale notification and evacuation. We care about the companies that make those things possible. We are interested in those kinds of things interacting with web emergency alerts and iPause stuff. We care about those alerts interacting with commercial grade mapping applications that are giving you offline real-time directions out of communities like Paradise when those things burn. So we work on specific technical things like that. We care about combining federal and non-federal resources to get a complete picture of mutual aid and the resources that are needed for all hazard incidents. And we are very interested in one of the things Robert mentioned. He just breezed by it, but he said you have to think about data across systems, you know, and there's a lot of implications with that. Not a single app. We tend to think of these things as sort of apps, like I've got an evacuation app or I've got a situational awareness app, but data in its purest form, and Esri is certainly a vanguard leader in this, is information that's consumable in web services or in a variety of formats across platforms. And sometimes that is a map, and sometimes that isn't a map, it's a dashboard. Sometimes it could be a lot of things that trigger alerts or meet conditions to trigger a sensor. So that idea of data across systems was sort of the genesis of the idea of the Fire Data Lab. So that's just a name we picked. It's an idea that basically we made a little organization out of it as a long-term partnership between fire agencies, fire data ninjas at Intterra, and the Western Fire Chiefs. But I want you to understand it is an open platform. It is not a notional idea of sharing, like what this is something we could do if we partnered. It's actually an existing, modern, cloud architect, secure data holding built by the best minds in public safety. And the data that's in it is interesting. We're a catcher's mitt for data. Real-time streams of millions of incidents out of CAD systems, records management systems with all of their detailed information about what we actually found there and what we did, tracking systems, sometimes staffing. And it's built to combine access and I would say that differently. It's built to combine data, to normalize it and denormalize it so we can access it quickly, so we can analyze in real time, and also for comparison. If you think about another thing that Robert was talking about, your data is your data. And many of you, probably most of you, especially if you're interested in this call, are doing good things in your departments with data. You have a real handle on the CAD data and the records management data. Some of you have put systems in that automatically pull these things and start doing analysis. Some of you probably more commonly have a whiz kid or two on staff that has access to all of your systems and is trying to parse and understand that. They're real analysts, and that is great. What this is streaming all of those kinds of things in real time to one place to combine that stuff. And I would say it's the first live aggregation of data the fire service has for all of these kind of incident data, fire records data, tracking data. And it includes one more important piece, really, that leads to something I want to ask Robert about real quick, and that is enrichment. We say that the Fire Data Lab enriches data, but what that means in super practical terms as we think about accelerating data-driven decisions is that every single incident that comes in or every single record that is pulled from any department as it's moved to the Fire Data Lab, it is immediately at that moment combined with things like American Community Survey data, like demographic data, insight kind of data to say, these are the kinds of people that live there. This is typical of the demographics. So if all of a sudden we're putting demographic data combined with incident data, then you are doing something that is super key, that another thing that Robert mentioned, and that is you're starting to understand and take the first step into real analysis and really using data effectively. Is we are by this encouraging people to sort of stop thinking about buildings. Not that we ever stop thinking about buildings, but a fire department is very structure oriented. You know, we say saving lives and property, but a lot of times what we mean is save the property, and if there's lives in it, make sure they're out. Lives are the most important, but we're caring about the lives because they're in the property a lot of times. I don't mean that we don't care about people. It's just that we do permitting for buildings when they are built. We're inspecting them as they live. We live through the whole life cycle of that structure. We care about the systems that are in it. We care about how, when we measure how fast we can get to it. And those response times, we build station based on the nature of that building stock and what kind of, we fill it with equipment that is good at responding to those buildings. And that is all well and good, but that leaves out people a lot in the risk that they provide. And you see that in EMS kind of statistics. If 8 out of 10 calls that any of us have are EMS-driven calls, then it's clearly not about the building, you know. And so when we're combining these incidents with demographic data, all of a sudden we have insight into the types of risks that are happening in different parts of our community, and we can really start to understand those kind of things. And so before I move on to that, one thing that we can do with this aggregated kind of data is study it. And I know that Robert's team has been active in that. The Western has too with them. But in particular, one thing that caught my attention was some of the, and I'm putting you on the spot, Robert, but the work that you guys have done with Rice University. You talk about that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the aggregation of this kind of information and data and the ability to be able to really start slicing and dicing it at any level, whether it be a macro or a micro level, we really believe is going to be intrinsic to changing the fire service moving forward and emergency services as a whole. Really from the outset, Intterra has always aimed to help fire departments to use data to analyze performance and how to get better, both for personnel and the communities that they serve. But it's really common for agencies to rate their success by examining their own performance against industry benchmarks or comparing themselves to others using budgets or quantities of engines or annual fire loss estimates, structures, things like that you've discussed. In a lot of other endeavors, though, we rate our success by how we work with peers, comparing alternative responses to problems and challenges and sharing results. So we've tagged up with Rice University and WFCA to try to use some of the big data that's in the Fire Data Lab to help the fire service move beyond just benchmarks into some comparison-based decision making. So you know, really to provide things like near-time real-time analytics tools and a live dynamic master data set, and in conjunction with academia to help them understand and begin exploring where the next advances in data science and analytics can really take the fire service. So we've got several years worth of information and data in the Fire Data Lab now, and there's more available. But the Rice's D2K lab as an interdisciplinary team that is assembled to explore data and identify unique characteristics and patterns and their outliers, and really transforming that data into knowledge. So they work directly with Houston Fire Department, one of our customers, to manage some of their data in the fire data lab, and has concluded that one of the things they came up with, looking at some of the dispatch data and data that was in there, that Houston could benefit from the addition of 5 new ambulances. So there's some really good information and data on those reports from RICE, available through RICE or through the Intterra website as well. But it's a change in how we address complex issues across the United States and across the fire service as a whole.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. That's something that I have never heard Intterra talk about publicly, but and I know Esri does the same kind of thing, as they pour a lot of time into R&D and research, and this kind of baseline research for the fire service is starting to be interesting when we're aggregating data from multiple departments with multiple staffing models and different kinds of population densities and issues. So I would pay attention to that and commend the Data to Knowledge program at Rice University. That's a program where these companies are paying the university for collaborative research, where out of their own pockets they're doing that so that fire can have insight. So I think that's kind of cool, and that is all about truly the spirit of accelerating the use of data and decision making. Robert talked a little bit about this, and I just wanted to really underscore that. If you're going to actually endeavor to accelerate your data-driven decision making, which is kind of an overused term in a lot of ways, you have to do some practical things. And he had a slide, if I recall, that said overcoming common problems, and the challenge was, are you using data to justify your way of doing things, or are you really asking the big questions? So I put this slide in here to drive us toward the point of the time we have today. If this is called accelerating your data-driven decision making, I don't think any of us have said that right today. But what we really want to emphasize is that you have to have good fundamentals. You have to ask the big questions. You have to be extremely honest and professional with the answers that you hear and what you do with those. Because I think that a lot of us could really benefit from asking ourselves the question, do we really have a plan for technology? I mean, I'll say it again, do you have a plan for technology? Some of you have strategic plans for technology, written documents that tie your things that you're doing with technology to organizational goals. LAFD is a good example of this. They have a CIO there that is very, very honest about this kind of stuff. So if we like to copy each other in the fire service, call Scott, the CIO of LA City Fire, and ask to see his strategic plan. That will help you. A lot of us are actually not doing it with a planning bent in mind per se. Of course, there's outliers. DeKalb County, Boulder, Colorado, there's a bunch of people that are really, really good at this with gifted analysts on their staff. We're good at data typically, though, and we're good at aggregating data in our department a lot of times. And that's the future of public safety, for health of your firefighters, for safety, for tactical operations, of course. But we don't do a ton outside of sort of early stabs at community risk for understanding risk and deployment in our community. And that's where we get into the fundamentals of this and the bent that I would like to take on this. And that is, if we ask ourselves, what are we actually trying to solve? And you can't do that without pairing it to the question you see there also, how will we know when we're done? A lot of times, and I think that you'll sort of look at your toes and sheepishly admit to your private self that this is true, is we start technology projects, but we have no intention of stopping them. We have no intention of doing anything but spinning things up and building a technology ecosystem. And that is a normal thing. It's a reaction to being sort of under-serviced by technology for so long. The old adage, 150 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. We hate that, and so we're going to fix that, and that's why we stand things up. But we have to ask ourselves, how do we know when we're done? And how does this actually move us forward? Is this the kind of thing that lends understanding to the problems we have in our community, hence the focus that we have to have with demographic data on people, not just incidents and metrics about how fast we got out of a station? We have to be honest about those kinds of things. Does it make us more what? I put a context thing in there. I don't know if it's the best slide, but we have to ask ourselves about technology that we deploy, decisions that we're making, what we were trying to find out, what we decide to analyze, by saying, does this blank give us a tactical advantage, give us backup and resilience? Does it make us more efficient? Do we understand the problems in our community more? All those kinds of things. But if you're not operating with absolute clarity about what you're doing and why you're doing it wrong already, before we even move a pixel. So in this vein, and to be a little more encouraging and not just Debbie Downer, I'll wrap up with a couple of thoughts and a couple of slides, and that is, what do we see out there that are trends that are good? We talked about the data across systems. We're seeing that prolifically in things like damage assessments, hurricane response, wildland fire. Robert and Mike could talk to you and give you chapter and verse on new sensors that are coming to bear, that are sharing remotely sensed data from UAS platforms, from fixed wing aircraft, and certainly from satellites, instantly processing. I know that there's systems out there that are operating for their second or third year in Colorado. They're about their fifth year, where, like last night, they were shooting with a multi-mission aircraft over the Grizzly Creek fire out of Glenwood Springs that burned across I-70, shooting video, processing the video on the plane, developing a heat perimeter, sending it off the plane to operational elements on the ground. Round trip time, 22 seconds. So that's raw data to information to knowledge in context on the ground with resources. So that's good. That's a trend that we're seeing. We're starting to see information like that shared across systems, so not everybody has to consume it in one system. Certainly the COVID-19 dashboards and the proliferation of data shared between agencies on health statistics from every city and county and state into national and international dashboards is a tremendous example of breaking down those barriers to solve a problem. I like to highlight that because we are galvanized for a problem. It tends to have in those moments an effect on making us share better and share across, identify information. And what are we scrambling for? The best information on time. So we're solving a problem about understanding a pandemic with data. And why would that be any different of a pattern for our home agency solving the problems that we see in our community? Another thing that Robert alluded to here was just that we can do a lot on tech, but it has to consider not just the people that we're studying and the context of demographics, but the people that we're serving. He mentioned lieutenants, captains, BCs, line level things. If intel is being ignored and a leader, or if a leader doesn't receive it in their context, if they do receive it but they don't understand it, you're being a nerd and you're overly complicating it to puff up your own ego, they won't believe it. And if they don't believe it, why did you do it? You shouldn't have spent a penny. So it has to be in a vernacular, no matter what you think of that vernacular, that is context aware and just the right information for them when they need it. And that certainly translates into strategic things too. One
Dave,
thing I would like, yeah.
I wanted to hit on a couple of major takeaways you've hit in the last couple of slides. I've been trying to jump in, but you're just so eloquent in the way you presented. I didn't want to interrupt you. So certainly, your reference to are we managing technology or is technology managing us is vitally important in this discussion, because we often see public safety agencies, or any agency for that matter, that has an interest in one type of capability, particularly technology, that may not, as you talked about, be easily integrated with what we already have in existing, in use in our agencies. I saw one study recently where a firefighter in a 24-hour shift had to sign into 22 different applications to get their daily work done, whether that's instant reporting or fire inspections or whatever it may be. So certainly that strategic planning specific to technology, and whether that's part of your overall strategic plan or you have an IT strategic plan, is vital. We don't buy a $1 million ladder truck without having policy in place, training planned and ready to be delivered, and the practices set forth, in an SOP manual or SOG manual of some sort. So why are we not doing that with the large investment we make annually in technology? So that hit the nail on the head. And certainly if somebody needs some references, David spoke towards LA County. We have several example IT strategic plans we can send you. So please feel free to reach out to get some of that information. And so Dave, a quick question to you. How does the Fire Data Lab align with, say, other industry data sources? And I'm thinking of things like, Enforce, Fire Cares. I know, you discussed enriching data with demographics and obviously other agencies, say CAD or RMS data, but are you seeing a trend where we're bringing in other types of data from other sources?
Yeah, I see a trend. I see a trend toward data aggregation. The NFPA has talked about it for a while and taken a few steps toward that. Enforce, Fire Cares are really great at it. My conditions for this kind of data are these: is the fire department has to maintain control of their data. The data has to tell the truth. I mean, we always lie with statistics, we say, but if you see in the process that data can go in and you have access to that data, that means that analysis can be done and you have access to knowing how that analysis was done, how it was figured, what the math was on that, that's a good thing. Anytime you find a system that puts data in a black box and gives you an answer, whether that's partisan in favor of chiefs or labor or EMS or fire or, city county governments or versus something else, then that's a red flag, because somebody's that's like sort of the definition of an oligarch, is sort of putting a chain across a river and guarding access to that. This data has to be open, it has to be transparent, you have to protect the ownership for the department that provides it, but we can certainly make performance data and make that open and interoperable. So I definitely see a trend toward it. That is a really good trend. And then we just have the normal growing pains with that, is like making sure we're using it wisely, and as good analysts, calling out shenanigans when we see it. Is like, don't take in the same data and come up with a crazy different answer and not let anybody check your homework. That would be irresponsible. But I think there's a real trend toward this, and I think we'll see things like, this is just my opinion, not that of my employer or anything else, is I think we'll see things like infers and those kind of reporting systems change. You cannot report data a year, like at the end of the year, process it for a year and dump out stats that are watered down and have that be meaningful. We're into real time right now with all the data from live sources, so I think that's a big trend.
Well, related to that kind of analysis, how do you see, a lot of the data we're collecting may not have that geospatial component. It might, maybe non-spatial data, essentially. And how do you see that as far as a trend, or the role of GIS related to non-spatial data in the modern fire service?
Yeah, I think Robert said it really well. I think there's a lot of non-spatial data from CAD and RMS and from lots of other things. And think of your systems that you have, staffing, your fleet and logistics kinds of things, but that's all data. And some of it's non-spatial, and the best uses of that are when you're sort of asking yourself the honest question, like, what am I trying to do? If I have to show every single thing on a map because like I'm an old school GISer, then I'm letting my bias interfere with the analysis. If I am only willing to show you things on a spreadsheet that tend to have a spatial or better representation, I'm a nerd on spreadsheets. I'm a CPA or something. So what I think is a good way to think about it is, if you think about the end user and what data they need in the context they need it, then it starts to describe itself as the best way to present it. So do not limit yourself to GIS analysis. There's so much rich data in the world that's not by default non-spatial or spatial at first. Some of it can become spatial and be joined to that and be a good look, but some of it's not appropriate for that. But don't ignore huge chunks of data because you're a GISer, and don't ignore mapping and GIS because they sit in a different department than you, and you're some highfalutin data analyst. So that would be kind of my answer to that.
Excellent, thanks.
Yeah, I want to just make one little, over emphasizing a point. We've talked about Some things that we've seen, but something that I don't see enough of is external data. We've talked about there are great examples of sharing and interoperability starting to happen, but what I'm talking about is like risk analysis. When you're doing accreditation, when we say we're doing community risk reduction, I'm challenging you to say that I'm not sure that you are. You're measuring stuff that you know about from your own agency, and you need to understand what your agency's doing. Sure, yeah, we have training SOPs, blah, 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 check, check, check. But we're not like counting hydrants and counting policies. You have to understand the performance within your agency and then begin to be better at analyzing the metrics and performance indicators and benchmarks that you have, given what happens in your community. So I've talked at length about including demographic data, but also, and this is sort of where I'm making my point here, is engage with people around you. COVID is a good example of us integrating with health systems, with people that are working with unhoused populations, with nonprofits, with people that are providing services to your same constituents in your same town. They have data about them. They have insight about them. They have clinical insight. They have EMS insight. They have behavioral insight, and they have activity insight. And so you need to get your data house in order and understand what you can know about yourself, but then you have to combine that with what they know about you and your clientele. So don't just track buildings, track people, track behavior that constitutes risk. And when you arrive at that combined data, then you can start to look for solutions and say, what if? And you can even model it in the data. So technology is not the mission. The mission is the mission, and technology is just one of our tools, you know. And so I just put sort of a different way to look at it here is if we're trying to make better decisions, and we talked about our data, external data, and focusing on people and real outcomes in the community, not outcomes like the buzzword, but working for data that contributes to what you all already know about yourself. You can have definitive, you can have definable goals for your community, and you can measure them and say, we are done with this, let's tackle the next biggest thing, or put that into some sort of maintenance kind of mode. And then as much as this has been about tech and data, and we love to talk about cloud architectures and interoperability and sensors, blah, 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 you're never going to get away from the fundamental fact that any of this is only possible with relationships. You have to curate your relationship with IT. You have to make them part of your mission. You have to do that with your external data holders. And if you don't, you won't get their data. You sure won't. So I think that's just about as plain as I can put it. And I know that I've taken about a little too much time in terms of the questions we want to ask, but I think we want to open it up for questions.
Thanks, Dave. And no, it was time well spent. So certainly don't feel like we went over by any means. So a couple of quick questions as we wrap it up, and please make sure that you have our contact information, which you can see there, and feel free to reach out to us by email. And if we have questions we don't address today, we will follow up after the webinar. So Dave, you were talking about, planning and adoption and data integration. What trends do you see as far as fire service or fire agencies adopting these capabilities day to day?
Yeah, I see that accreditation has been a good process in the whole to have agencies start looking at what do we really know about ourselves. I think as a trend, I've seen that we see that some of the places that we hold our data, CAD systems and RMS systems, most notoriously, are very bad at sharing that data out. I see a trend for these companies, the progressive ones, are starting to make sharing easier to share with other systems. I think you should pay attention to anybody who tells you that when you put your data into their system and you're paying a premium cost for that system, that it will cost you again to get your data out. They do not own your data. Don't let the fast double talking happen with this is, like integration and it's hard. Cloud and APIs are easy. Your data went in easily. They took your money and put it in. We see that the good ones are letting it out without a paywall. So that's a red flag. We see that going away. We see the proliferation of IoT devices like that are not what we normally think of. We see like deploying this week in California are 30,000 devices to plug into a wall that measure voltage in your home and electrical system from an insurance agency. So as soon as you have an electrical issue, they send an electrician. It's part of it, part of the service. We can also use those same sensors to measure faults on the electrical grid and notify utilities the moment we have big fires. So I see good things out of that. The big question I always get asked is indoor localization or tracking. With some of the things like FirstNet that have come onto the scene, we're seeing big companies spend R&D dollars and have some real solutions coming. So at the Western, we like to test those things. If you're interested in that kind of testing at your department, just shoot me a note because we're actively working with several of those vendors. So those are a few of the trends that I see, Mike.
Great. And this question can go to you or Robert. What are some examples of external data sets you think are key for incorporating decision-making, data-driven decision-making, particularly during community risk reduction initiatives?
Do you want to take a shot at that, Rob? I'm happy to. Also.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that just a little while ago, Dave, which is ensuring that you have some visibility into the data sets that you're bringing in and how it impacts people, right? That data set could be all kinds of different things, from health information and integrating with hospitals and other providers of information and data and non-spatial information as well as spatial information. But the reality is that to start thinking about data-driven decision-making as it relates to outcomes and as it relates to outcomes and people. And really what we do, because that's really what we do in public safety, it's really what we do in the fire service, is work with and serve people in our communities. So those data sets are critical, especially when you're talking about community risk reduction. And what does that really mean? What is the community value from a risk reduction standpoint? How does it impact people? And that goes to everything from evacuation planning and all the big tactical things that we think about when we're dealing with those types of things to how we deal with the potential for third level dispatch and dealing with folks in an unhoused environment. So lots of different types of things that can go into CRR. I don't know, do you want to elaborate on that at all?
No, I think that's it. And if I was taking notes on the webinar and I was thinking about like how to do that, how do I sink my teeth into it, I would say get a hold of demographic data. Free is American Community Survey data. Certainly Esri has Business Analyst, and that's a terrific data set with Tapestry that can integrate right into the GIS stuff that you already use. There's several others out there, but understanding people in a holistic way, sort of like a Starbucks would. They're not going to put a store somewhere without understanding how that's going to work and serve the neighborhood. They're giving a service. Coffee, nectar to my veins, but you give a more important service, and you should be considering your resource management and service to your community in those same terms. And second, I would put is health data. Leverage the relationships that you've made in COVID-19 and create a permanent flow of information, whether that's disease surveillance or health data or interaction with schools and what they're doing, into your understanding of the community and your data and your service to them. We could go on and on, but those are big two that would keep you busy for a year.
Yeah, I mean, the holy grail for that, David, is to think about the thought process of how an outcome impacts a person and the ability to track data coming in from the 911 call to patient discharge at a hospital. And can we figure out how to get granular enough to know that a KPI that we followed, like administering, aspirin to a cardiac arrest patient within a particular period of time, reduces our mortality rates and improves, people getting out of the hospital by X percentage. Those are the types of long distance pictures that I see we should be looking at with this data.
That's a really good
certainly
example.
one of the best sources is, and Dave, you mentioned it, was the Living Atlas. So a lot of the data sets we're discussing are openly available on Living Atlas, or and can be easily integrated into any of these applications. Particularly, you've mentioned demographics. I mean, some of the demographics available both in Living Atlas and through community or business analysts are incredible. I mean, down to a pretty granular level. to identify that at-risk population or who's being impacted by these events. So do you two see any agencies that have models or templates that analyze, report, and display their data benchmarked against standards like ISO or WSRB, which is a rating bureau, or even, say against 1710? Are you able to show those performance metrics and some kind of visual display or visual product? Do you have any good working models of that?
That's a Rob question for sure, but I have thoughts.
Yeah, there's definitely, anybody interested in that type of data, we'd love to, at our heart and soul at Intterra, what we really are is data plumbers, and we love connecting people. We love connecting agencies together that can gain value from communicating with one another. So, from agencies trying to understand and work with their standards of cover to day-to-day performance metrics, or just getting your arms wrapped around your data sets. We'd be happy to put you in touch with agencies that have been there, done that. Some of them are on leading edge. Some of them that are still struggling with it on a day-to-day basis. As a matter of fact, a really good resource for that might be the website for Intterra at interragroup.com has got a series of webinars on it. A recent one just done with Chief Peterson from Unified Fire Authority and Leonard Chan from and Heather Gallagher from Houston Fire Department. And it's all about becoming a data-driven department and how we move through some of these different piece parts of things and manage that type of stuff. So there's definitely some resources available, but I would encourage anyone to feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to point you in directions of people willing to share that information and data.
Great, Rob. Thanks. So last question, and we're going to wrap it up here. Are there resources that cover how to best use Intterra and ArcGIS Pro together? So, is there guidance from the Intterra side? Certainly we can support it from the Esri side, but do you have anything available that integrates, so say seasonal field data, or make reports and maps outside of Intterra, or to communicate those visual products, say outside of the Intterra application?
Yeah, like I mentioned, being data plumbers is just sort of at our heart and soul of what we do, and being able to, we pride ourselves on being able to not only ingest that information into our application, but then present it back out in formats that make a lot of sense for different agencies in different types of environments, like being able to take, evacuation planning and map information and data and push it to, tools law enforcement might be using, like ATAC and whatnot, or being able to look and export information to communicate better with the public through dashboards and through Esri's dashboards. Being able to take some of that information and data and present it out into those environments. Collecting data, utilizing different types of tools from Survey 123 and Collector to things like the Intterra Field app, and process that information and then push it back out as a transparent data set through your public information office, whether you're dealing with day-to-day performance questions or something immediate and emergent, a large scale, like a wildfire or something like that. So there's definitely options and opportunities there, and we're exploring more as we continue to move forward with tools like AGOL and other tools that we can manage inside of the tools and send it out.
That's great. So that's going to be our last question for the session. Please, there's a poll question that comes up as we exit, so please take a moment, answer that poll question for us, and make sure you have our contact information on the screen currently. I want to thank David and Robert for joining us today. A lot of good information. I think we came up with about 4 more webinars worth of subject matter just out of our short discussion we had today. Please feel free to reach out, again, by email with any additional questions, and we hope you have a good day. Thank you so much.